Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I and my good friend Stilgar take turns discussing topics from history which the other person doesn't know about and quite often hasn't heard about. So today I'm actually taking a user request. One of our viewers had asked me to discuss what was going on in Latin America during the Napoleonic era. So I'm going to ask Stilgar, do you know anything? You're very familiar with Napoleon, of course, but how much do you know about Central and South America?
Very little. Very little.
Yeah, I actually don't know a terrible lot about them either, even though they are my neighbors, which I suppose is kind of unfortunate. But with this request, I had the chance to learn a bit more. So I want to talk about what was happening. It's actually, as I was doing my research, it's way too big of an area. So I'm going to kind of narrow it down a bit. And so let's get into it. Okay. So what happens is when Napoleon came to power in Europe, almost all of, Spain still had almost all of its colonies. The only colony they had lost before then that I know of was Santo Domingo, which today we call the Dominican Republic. And the reason they lost it is because they share an island with Haiti. And the Haitian Revolution was very vicious, and it started out as kind of a slave uprising, and it ended with a complete ethnic cleansing where they removed all the white people from Haiti permanently. And so Haiti, of course, shares the island with Dominican Republic, or with the Spanish colony that would later be Dominican Republic. And the ruling class, rich Spanish overlords, just got up and left and took as much assets with them as they could once that race war started in Haiti. So by default, that place became independent. So, but getting back to the topic here, in 1808, Napoleon took over Spain, and he put his brother Joseph Bonaparte in charge of Spain as the king, and he ruled Spain from 1808 to 1813. And the guy that was there before the king of Spain was Ferdinand VII, and he belonged to the Bourbon dynasty. And at the end, the people of Spain, they don't really accept Joseph Bonaparte, and he's widely opposed. And the reason that they're so against him is because most people in Spain are put off by the French Revolution, and they don't want to have that kind of influence in their country. They're afraid that something like that might happen in Spain. So they resist this guy. And by 1813, in 1813, it's so troublesome that Napoleon kind of gives it up, and he puts Ferdinand VII back in charge. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the conditions that existed in the Spanish colonies in the New World. So, like I said, Spain still retained almost all of its colonies in the New World at the time that they were taken over by Napoleon. And of course, England also colonized North America. They had a lot of colonies in the New World, but the English, they sent over every level of society. They sent a lot of people over, families, all that. Spain sent very few people over. They weren't really interested in recreating their civilization on another continent. So the main goal that Spain has is to harvest raw materials and resources from the New World. So they're interested in metals, minerals, and crops like cash crops, plantations, and such, and ranches. So just raw materials and raw product. The main industries would be mines, plantations, and ranches in their colonies. So Spain, actually made some good money off of their colonies. And the system was that they would profit from their colonies in two ways. So on the one hand, they're getting rich because of all the materials and resources that they're mining. And then they take all those materials and create manufactured goods, tools, clothes, etc., and they sell that stuff back to the colonies. So it's a two-way profit for them. One is wholesale of raw materials, and two is sell the finished product back to them. And I imagine that the cost of the shipping was buried in the sale price as well. So there's an official. His name was Antonio de Narvaez y la Torre, and he was the governor of Santa Maria in 1778. And he put it this way regarding the role of the Spanish colonies. He said, America provides Spain with the raw materials which this vast and fertile country produces, and Spain redistributes them as manufactures made by her artisans and industries. Thus, everyone is employed according to the character of both countries, and the relations, ties, and mutual dependence of each part of the empire are maintained. So then on November 28th, in the year 1800, a royal decree is issued banning all manufacturing in the Spanish colonies. So you're not allowed to make any products there other than harvesting raw materials. And just for good measure, they issue another decree on October 10th, 1801, which is an order to the Spanish officials to shut down any and all factories in their realms. So I've got a quote from that as well. To effect their destruction by the most convenient means they can devise, even if it means taking them over by the royal treasury on the pretext of making them productive. So that'd be like, maybe buy up the factory and then shut it down. Use the tax money to buy it up and then shut it down. So even with all these efforts, there's still a little bit of manufacturing that goes on in some places, especially when Spain was at war with England. You know, England had a much better fleet, much better navy. They had a much better navy than France as well. So some of the colonial subjects, they took to making their own products because they were temporarily cut off from Spain. Then there's a caste system, like a racial caste system and hierarchy, which exists in all the Spanish colonies. And apparently, there's different jobs that you're allowed to have based on your status, based on your racial composition and your ancestry. But I wasn't able to really find much details on that. Maybe for another time we can address that. But basically, to put it simply, the highest level that you could be in a Spanish colony and the level which would provide you with the most opportunities where you could do pretty much anything you wanted was for people that were born in Spain who had moved there. And these guys were called peninsulares because Spain is a peninsula. So if you're most of the regional governors and rulers, they're going to be peninsulares. And they are going to be, all the richest people are going to be directly from Spain. Then you have another group called Creoles, which I think in their language is Criollo, but in the stuff I was reading, it's just they call them Creoles. I guess that's how it's rendered in English. And in this case, we've mentioned this word Creoles before in some other videos. And in the United States, it has something to do with people from Louisiana. But in this context of the Spanish colonies, a Creole is a person who is completely white or of European origins, but who was born in the New World. And these guys are beneath the peninsulars. So they can have whatever kind of job they can get economically, but they're going to be kept out of a lot of the government positions because Spain doesn't want the people in the New World to be governing themselves. They're kind of afraid of that. They don't want to lose control. So they have a lower status than the peninsulars. So the way you can think of it is like, it's really the difference between you and me. Like if we were alive back then and living in these colonies, you would be a peninsular and I would be a Creole. And you would have your first pick of any job, like the higher paying jobs and any government jobs. And like if you and me went to apply for the same government job, obviously they would give it to you. And even the women, like not that many women would come over from Spain, but when they would, there would be guys pretty much waiting for them. And the peninsulars would have their first pick, followed by Creoles. Okay, and then underneath the Creoles, you have mestizos, which is somebody of mixed European and native descent, which is what most of the people are in that part of the world. And then natives, which are people that are, they like the books, they call them Indians in a lot of most of the time, but I don't like to use that term, so I'm just going to call them natives and Amerindians. And of course, there was, even though the Spanish ruling class was against race mixing and they stigmatized it, and those people were deliberately discriminated against, it still happened quite a lot. So they actually made all these charts where they would say, if you have this level of mixture with this, then you're that, and so on and so forth. And they have names depending on what you're a mixture of and how much. And then what happens if this kind of person marries that kind of person. It's kind of complex, actually. And they had their own caste system going on. And I'll put I did find some images of that, so I'll put that in the slideshow.
Why were they against that?
Race mixing? I don't
Yep.
know. I've never really cared myself, you know. You'd have to ask somebody that cares to really know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what if they had some kind of specific reason back in the day, because I mean,
I'm sure. I mean, like, it's a good question, right? There's still a lot of people that have problems with it today. And I guess, I mean, the only thing I know for sure is Spain absolutely wanted to maintain the status quo, and they didn't want to let the New World be under the control of anybody but Spanish officials. They wanted to keep things going, you know, keep the mines and the ranches and all that stuff going. I think I don't know, man, about the race mixing. Why they cared so much.
Just curious if that's a result of the Reconquista, if that's something they inherited, or because they were discriminated against themselves under the Muslim occupation, Arab occupation. Because if you look at the Spanish people, they're basically a mix of Greeks, Visigoths, and the original Romans, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Celtic and Roman, and then this other group called Iberos, and I think today the only thing left of the Iberos is the Basque people. But good question. I think one of the reasons why, because we look at different European powers, they weren't all so brutal. Spain was probably the most brutal. We talked about what they did to the Guanches. And they were pretty rough on the native people in the New World when they conquered them. They abused them, and they assigned them a lower status, and they used them for almost slave labor. And the Catholic Church had to actually issue a decree telling them you can't just do whatever you want to these people. They are technically, like, they had to issue a decree stating that the natives are humans, which seems kind of extreme, and should have been obvious. But at any rate, like, I think definitely being under Muslim control for so long changed them. And they probably actually thought that they were good people, even though they were doing all this stuff, because they weren't as bad as the Muslims were. I think when it comes to race mixing, it has a lot to do with national identity And probably the idea is that you don't want to have other elements introduced into your country because that will change the political and the cultural character of your country. That'd be my guess. Like, I guess it would be a break with continuity, right? Because if you look a certain way and have this certain genome for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden you change that drastically, then the question is like, is it really going to be a continuation of the original culture? And of course, these things do happen a lot. Like, you have some cultures that'll go and invade and take over others, and then what you end up with afterwards is different. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like there's not anyway. Spanish people, you have ones that with blonde hair and blue eyes, and you have darker complexion ones as well. So anyway, just curious, but I'll let you
Yeah,
continue on the main story. So
yeah.
about the
Sorry about.
colonies, I'm sure they probably actually the Netherlands also lost most of its colonies thanks to Napoleon. But anyway, but
Yeah,
continue with your story. Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, so I got kind of. I don't know. The answer is I don't know why they cared so much. I just have my theory, which I gave. So, uh, but the point is though, all these different groups that are in the New World as a result of this, they do have different interests and concerns, and they're treated in different ways by the government, and a lot. They also have their own grievances. So the thing is, the mestizos and the people that are pure Amerindians, they don't have really much of a say in anything at all that's happening, and they're also limited in certain ways. The Creoles, who are completely European, they're also they have more options to them economically, and they can participate in the local governments, but they're not the like the viceroy is going to be from Spain. So the highest level government positions is people directly from Spain. So Spain doesn't trust the Creoles, and they put peninsulars in all the most powerful positions, the political posts, and over most of the transatlantic trade. And the Creoles who own land or mines, they're going to be doing good. You know, they just they have no issues. They're already very rich. But then the other Creoles, like if you don't own a, a bunch of land or a mine, then you're in trouble because Spain has said that there's no manufacturing. So you have limited options. A lot of those guys, they could serve as supervisors or managers working for the rich people. But then there are a lot of Creoles that just dropped out of, I guess, the middle class. What middle class there was dropped out entirely and ended up assimilating into the mestizos because they don't have any support base or any opportunities. And the government office, government positions was the only job that most Creoles could work. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunity for small business because of the rules that Spain has put. So you pretty much had to own land or own a mine, or it's going to be very hard for you. So from 1751 to 1808, 200 out of 266 audiencia appointments went to peninsulars, while 62 went to Creoles. And the audiencia was colonial government. I'm not sure what the English term it would correspond to. I'll put something in the slideshow if I find out. In 1809, only 25 out of 99 appointments to the colonial tribunals were Creoles, and only 6 were appointed to their own district. So the Spanish government is the peninsulars, they're a very small minority, but they've got all the most powerful positions, basically. And then there's an observer. There's this guy, Alexander von Humboldt, who was a foreigner living in this part of the world. And he made this observation about the state of the Creoles there. He said, the lowest, least educated, and uncultivated European believes himself superior to the white born in the New World. So like some guy that's just got no education at all would think he's better than the rich landowner guy who was or the rich mine operator who was born in the New World. So when Joseph Bonaparte takes over and is put in charge of Spain, the colonies are all of a sudden left on their own. It's like the head was cut off of the snake, basically. And whether they wanted it or not, they were all functionally independent. And there's no backup that's going to come from Spain to help the peninsulars that are ruling the place. So they have two big concerns, both the peninsulars and the Creoles. One thing is they don't want to have anything that's like a French Revolution. Like they're totally spooked by that, especially the anti-clerical, anti-church kind of stuff that was going on during the French Revolution. And then the other thing that has them spooked was the Haitian Revolution, where they just did a complete ethnic cleansing of the white people. And they're afraid that the native workforce might do something like that to them, because they're a minority. There actually are not that many white people there. Even if you count both the Creoles and the Peninsulars, they're outnumbered. So something like that could happen. And that's actually one of the things that does happen, which I'm about to get to here. So most of the governments, the colonial governments, they remain loyal to Spain, at least in terms of what they're saying, their official statements. So, but then what they do is they don't recognize Joseph Bonaparte as the legitimate king. They say that, oh, our king is Ferdinand VII. But of course, Ferdinand VII is out of power. So what happens is different groups start taking advantage of this opportunity to do things that they otherwise would not. And this is where I have to narrow it down, because there's too many countries down there for me to talk about everything. So I just want to talk about Mexico, which is the next door neighbor for us. So Mexico, at the time that this happens, they are 60% of the people are natives, 22% are mestizos, and 18% are white. And of the white population, a much smaller amount is peninsulars. And the guy that's in charge of Mexico at this time, his name is Jose de Iturrigare. He's the Viceroy of Mexico, appointed by the king. And what happens is there's two entities in Spain that are each claiming to be the legitimate government, but neither of them is the actual king or Ferdinand. They're juntas. So there's the junta of Oviedo and the junta of Sevilla. And they both send delegations to Mexico to say that we're the official government. And neither is recognized right away. They don't know what to do about it when they come to Mexico. Like, oh, which of these guys do we pick? I don't know. So the city of Mexico, the city council of Mexico City is a local government made up of mostly Creoles. And they ask Iturrigare to take full control of the government of Mexico and establish a representative assembly, which I guess would be kind of like a Congress or parliament, where the people are chosen by elections. And my guess is they didn't mean for like Amerindians to participate in this. They probably just wanted it to be for white people. But I don't know, maybe not. So this guy, the Viceroy, Iturrigare, he holds 4 meetings on which of the Spanish juntas Mexico should recognize, which of these insurgent governments, I guess. But no consensus is reached. They can't decide which group they want to recognize, so they end up not recognizing either of them at all. And the peninsulars in Mexico, they get kind of nervous because Iturrigare is looking like he's going to just declare himself the ruler and make Mexico a sovereign country, and they don't want that. So they actually overthrow him because they think he's disloyal to the king for even thinking about making Mexico to an independent country. However, in doing that, they actually are egregiously breaking the law because this guy is the legitimate appointment of the king. So they're actually taking down the king's representative. It's totally outside the bounds of all legality. And the Peninsulars, they put in this guy who is over 80 years old called Pedro de Garibay, and they make him the Viceroy of Mexico. And their idea is that, well, he's so old that he'll just be a puppet for us and he can do whatever we say. And from 1808 to 1810, no reforms are made on behalf of either the Creoles or the natives. None of their issues are addressed or taken into consideration. And the main concern of this of the Peninsulars is what France is going to do. They're worried about France sending over subversive agents to start, I guess, some kind of French Revolution over there in Mexico. So some of the Creoles, they start a conspiracy to overthrow the Spanish ruling class, and they think that they can get the natives to help them, and they want to take the Spanish out of power and seize their assets. That's their goal. So we come to the Hidalgo Rebellion. In 1810, there's a priest who works in a small town called Dolores, and his name is Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. And this guy is a Catholic priest, but he's highly political, and he preaches politics in his church. And he has a large following of both Creoles and natives. So they work together to prepare a rebellion. The rebellion is supposed to start in October, but the government finds out about it. So Hidalgo decides to start it early. And he does it beginning with his church service on Sunday, on September 16th, 1810. Hidalgo issues the Grito de Dolores, where he encourages the natives and the mestizos to rise up and overthrow the Peninsulars. And one of the things that he wanted them to do was end the tribute, which this is something I don't know much about, but apparently the natives had to pay some kind of regular tribute to the Spanish overlords. So it's like they're being treated as a conquered people, for hundreds of years, actually, since Spain came in there and took over. So later on, he adds the abolition of slavery and the return of native lands to native communities to his political platform. And he allows his followers to loot and pillages and actually encourages them to rob the Peninsulars and take their stuff. Unfortunately, the natives, they can't really tell the difference between a Peninsular and a Creole. So they just go after white people in general, kill them and take their stuff. They capture the city of San Miguel El Grande in Celaya. Oh, sorry. So I got a few cities here. San Miguel El Grande and Celaya, Guanajuato, and Valladolid. And they move on to Mexico City after that. So they take 1, 2, 3, 4 cities. When they take Guanajuato, it's particularly violent. The Peninsulars and the Creoles, they take refuge in a granary, which was built like a fortress, and they try to hold out there and defend themselves, but they get massacred, and then the Amerindians pillage the city for 2 days straight. So this uprising is categorized as like a native revolt, and they take it as a race war. The ruling class, they take it as a race war against whites in general, rather than a political movement with legitimate grievances. And the Creoles are forced to side with the Peninsulars, whether they want to or not, because they're trying to avoid being killed. And then the new viceroy, his name is Francisco Javier Venegas, assembles an army, and he puts this guy who comes from Spain, Brigadier Felix Maria Calleja, in charge of the army. So the first battle is between Calleja and Hidalgo's forces is fought outside of Mexico City. And at the beginning of the battle, Hidalgo has 80,000 men. And the rebels, they do win the fight, but it's at a high cost because they're not a professional army. And they're going up against the professional army for the first time. So 2,000 natives are killed in the conflict. And in addition, 40,000 of them just desert. They run off. So the rebels, they camp outside of Mexico City for 3 days and send demands to the viceroy, but eventually they retreat and Calleja chases after them. They lose a battle near a city called Aculco, and Hidalgo moves on he moves on to a place called Valladolid, and then after staying there for a short time, he moves on to Guadalajara. And while he's in these two cities, he allows or orders, not really sure, the execution of 400 peninsulars that were hostages. Just kills them. And so that annoys the peninsulars to a greater degree. So then throughout the whole Hidalgo Rebellion, 2,000 peninsulars were killed in Mexico out of a total of 15,000. So there were 15,000 people from Spain in Mexico at the time. And a higher number of Creoles is killed, but I don't have the number for that. So maybe it's not known, or I can put something in the slideshow if I find it. And then on January 17th, 1811, Hidalgo suffers his worst defeat yet outside of Guadalajara, and he and his officers run for their lives. He's captured near Coahuila, and they take him and his officers to Chihuahua, where they're put on trial and shot, and then their heads are cut off, and their heads are put on display on the granary in Guanajuato, where they had massacred all of those Creoles and Peninsulars. But of course, Hidalgo is not the only rebel. There's another guy named Jose Maria Morelos, who started along with Hidalgo, was working for him as part of his movement. But this rebellion takes longer to put down, and it goes all the way up to 1815. And Morelos is actually a mestizo, but he's college educated, and he is a member of the clergy. He's also a priest, and he had a lot of political ideas as well. He wanted to do away with the monarchy, the caste system, and class restrictions, redistribute property, and he wanted to create an income tax. So I guess they had no income tax originally in Mexico. But it's interesting how, and of course this is not everything that's going on, but it's interesting how so many priests got involved in this political violence that was going on, and also into racial violence. And it makes me wonder about the quality control that they have on the priesthood. And one thing is, I think in the case of Morelos, because he's a mestizo, he's kept out of a lot of jobs because he's an even lower status than the Creoles. So he might have joined the clergy just as a way up. What I read about him is that he came from a poor family that was, I think they were farmers, something like that. And so there's only so many ways that he can go up because of the restrictions. So maybe he was not really that sincere when it comes to theological matters, but because so many avenues were closed to him, that was the way that he saw that he could move up. So Morelos' rebellion was more political and had more clearly defined objectives than Hidalgo's. Most of the people following him were mestizos. They were a bit less racial in their application of violence, like they were more focused on achieving the political ends rather than just killing a particular people group. And they won a lot of battles before he's finally caught in 1815 And he is put on trial by the Catholic Church, where they degraded. It says they degraded him. I'm not sure what that means. I guess maybe they took away his status. They defrocked him, and then after that, he was handed back to the Spanish government, where he was executed by firing squad. So, Ferdinand VII, he gets put back in charge of Spain in 1813, and once he takes power, he starts working to restore the status quo in all the Spanish colonies. But at this point, it's kind of too late, and there's continuous unrest. And Mexico finally gets its independence in 1821. And I actually didn't have time to do all the full research to flesh out their entire independence story. But there's actually a general, basically, long story short, there's a general. His name is Agustin de Iturbide or Iturbide. And he ends up becoming he ends up getting Mexico its independence. And the way he does it is he gives each of the different factions something that they want. So he makes guarantees to the Catholic Church. He makes guarantees to the Mestizo and Amerindian people who want certain things, guarantees to the Creoles, guarantees to the Peninsulars. Like he promises to make the Catholic Church the official religion of state once they get their independence. So that kind of pacifies them and wins their support. And then he promises social equality to the Mestizos and Amerindians to end all the discrimination, and to the Creoles as well. And then he promises to protect the property and allow people to retain their assets. And that satisfies the Peninsulars so that they don't run away to Spain and take all their stuff with them. And he's the one that makes Mexico into an independent country. He becomes the emperor, the first emperor of Mexico, and I think the only emperor of Mexico. And he actually doesn't last very long, and then he gets overthrown, but that'd be a topic for another video. So, at any rate, that's all I got. I don't know if you want to add anything or have any questions.
Yeah, interesting story. I think maybe part of the reason that that some of the Catholic clergy adopted the agenda was, I guess, that they were trying to fight back against hatred, but unfortunately they were using more hatred. I think that is also the fault that has happened in the past with the Catholic Church adopting a lot of socialist agenda. Just because something is against an evil doesn't mean it's good. So you end up replacing one evil with another evil. Instead, they should have just fought against, of course, the injustice of the caste system using the Bible. But anyway, but yeah, I guess they picked the easy way out. So yeah.
And Morelos and Hidalgo were not the only Catholic priests that were involved in the political violence. There was quite a bit of it. And this is only a small fragment, a rather significant one, but only a small fragment of what was going on. And only in Mexico, the other colonies, they had different stories. Same issue, like nobody was getting ready to recognize Joseph Bonaparte. Like they were all cut off. There was no really not much in the way of contact with Spain. So they, whether it's officially on paper or not, they all were functionally independent, even though they don't actually get their real, true, official on paper independence until later. But yeah, I was kind of actually amazed at how so many of these priests were getting involved in violent politics. And Spain was actually kind of afraid, of that, and they used to try to fill the higher clergy positions with peninsulars because of this fear that the colonies might rise up. And actually, a lot of the stuff they did, it seems like it was motivated by fear. Like, oh, we're not gonna let them have factories because we don't want them to become independent. We want to keep making our double profits, and we don't want them to be self-sufficient. And then also, we don't want to let them into government positions because they might try to become independent. But what they end up doing is frustrating the dickens out of them so that they kind of advocate for independence. And there's still a lot of issues today in Mexico. And moving up to the independence movement, like there was a lot of, one violent uprising after the other. And of course, the first emperor, he gets overthrown. I don't want to say something wrong, but I think that the guy that overthrows him is actually Santa Anna, which if we have any viewers in Texas, they'll all know right away who that is. But that's kind of the history of Mexico, is a lot of political violence. And I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that every president of Mexico, or almost every president, after they get done serving as president, they usually will leave the country and relocate to somewhere else. Somebody in Mexico actually told me that in a forum, because they make enemies while they're there, and they kind of take advantage of the system. And then when they're out of power, their protection isn't as good, so they run for it. But that's anecdotal, so take that one with a grain of salt. But anyways, yeah.
That's also what happens to a lot of countries in the Middle East, right? And in Africa.
Yeah.
After their reign is over, they'll flee somewhere else and live there, and with their the millions they siphoned over the border.
There was the richest woman, I don't know if this is still true, but a few years ago, the richest woman in Africa, I forget what her full name was and what country she's from, but her last name was Dos Santos. And she got rich because her father was the dictator for a while. And she just used that opportunity to divert all sorts of money to her overseas accounts, just kind of taking from the cookie jar. And then when he was out of power, she ran off to Portugal or Spain. And I think, and then after that, her country, like when the new regime was there, they were trying to get her extradited so they could get that money back out of her. I don't know if they ever did or not. I imagine she wouldn't be so stupid as to go there willingly. But yeah, it's a lot of corruption, and it might be good to. Eventually, what I want to do is do something about Texas and also the Mexican-American War. If anybody's interested and wants to hear more about this topic, do let me know, because I think this is the first time that we've ever dealt with South America or Central America in any of our videos, right? I think so.
I think so. Most of our viewers are in the US, though, so be curious to see what kind of topics they enjoy, because some of our topics have been more European focused. So I wonder if they want to hear more about European history, or rather US and the Americas. Yeah.
All righty. That's all I got.
Okay, cool. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ivor. Cool story. Learned something new today. So if you like if listeners like the story, please give us a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We do one every week, and hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.